Hopefully you can hear me. We shall soon see. Got this. All right, shall I just begin? Okay. Well, thank you, Mallory, for inviting me today to put on a presentation of what I call Suicide Prevention 101. Um, During the presentation, I will have to switch to my screen sharing so you won't see my beautiful face. You're not going to miss much. And I can go back and forth if anybody wants to ask me any direct questions. It'll last about an hour. Look forward to hearing feedback and seeing what questions that you guys have. Wrong share. Where's my screen share? Viewing. You've got to be kidding. No, it won't let me share my screen. Anybody has an idea of where the share the screen button is, I would be okay. There's no screen share button. There was before. I don't know what happened. Well, I can just talk and you won't get to see my presentation. But 22 years ago, I began doing suicide prevention work. I come by this work very honestly because I lost my wife, Kristen, to suicide 22 years ago this last April. I was able to share it before, Mallory. you know what I can do is when the slide comes up that's worth looking at, I can just literally pick up my camera and show you. Look at that. Now there's a low-tech production. Normally, as in always when I do presentations, somebody else handles production because I'm 2 left feet when it comes to technology and trying to keep my mind on the presentation. Let's see if I can even activate. Oh, here we go. All right. So that is Kristen. And as you can see by her birth and death date, she died at age 28. She suffered from bipolar disorder. Most people don't realize there are 2 different types, type 1 and type 2. She also suffered from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. She had a family history of suicide, and she seemed to get both sides of the family the worst illnesses that existed on both sides of the family. And when you combine those along with borderline personality disorder, and for those who don't know what that is the inability to count to 10, to be able to think before you act. And those folks are at most risk for suicide. And in fact, that is the diagnosis that should have been the red flag. But you think about the name, borderline means borderline, right? You'd think borderline okay, borderline not okay. In fact, it's nowhere near that. It's a really bad name for a very, very potentially fatal illness if not addressed properly. And in her case, it wasn't. And in 1997, she became pregnant. It was an unplanned pregnancy, but we decided to stay in California because she had health insurance with her company. And 5 months into the pregnancy, she lost the baby. And it was largely due to birth defects that she blamed on the antidepressants that she was on, which now today are contraindicated for folks that are bipolar, type 1 or type 2. So after she lost the baby, she went through what we would refer to as severe postpartum depression. She hid it very well. On the day that she was to have delivered our baby, happened to also be the same day that she ended up taking her life in a psychiatric care facility. And if anybody should have died, it should have been me, not her. And with this next slide, I'll show you why. That car was an Audi 5000, and the pole on the left is the pole that I hit doing about 70 miles an hour without a seatbelt on. And on the next slide, you can see my head that went through the windshield. And over here, you can see the hole in the windshield. That's the big red circle. And then the little red circle is the hood where my head finally hit. I certainly should not have survived that particular car accident, but that was only one of many in my life. It just happens to be the one that I have photos of. I've fallen off sailboats at night with nobody on the boat able to sail or come back and get me in San Francisco Bay. I grew up in New York City during the Harlem riots, and I would ride my bicycle through Harlem during the riots. I should have died 100 different times, 100 different ways. Kristen, on the other hand, took very good care of herself, never put anything poisonous into her body, always wore a seatbelt. And she was learning yoga and holistic methods of healing herself and not having to use what she referred to as psychotropic medications. So she checked into a psychiatric care facility 2 days before her suicide. And on the 7th of April, managed to end her life on a suicide watch. And a month later, I get a check from her work that basically covered a whole year of her pay. It was some type of insurance benefit that all the employees at HealthNet had. And it was remarkable to me that there was no organization to donate the money to. I certainly didn't want the money. I wanted to put it towards preventing suicides like Kristen's, postpartum depression, which do occur more often than most people are willing to recognize. Andrea Yates was the most famous for killing her children, but she herself was suicidal as well. I had a background in marketing and publishing. Kristen and I had a newspaper called the Barton Classifieds, and our phone number was 1-800-FREE-ADS. So I assumed there would be a hotline for people that are suicidal. And when I found out that there wasn't, and mind you, this was in 1998. In 1998, we had 1-800-plumber, 1-800-bathtubs. We had pop-up ad came up that is preventing me from seeing. Oh, there we go. That's better. 1-800-flowers, 1-800-bathtub, the famous 1-800-collect, 1-800-Judaism, 1-800-mattress, you name it, it existed, but nothing for suicide. So on September 18th, 1998, I launched 1-800-Suicide. And that certainly should have been done by the national mental health organizations, should have been done by the government, should have been done decades earlier. But as a lot of my colleagues like to say, they were all ready aim, ready aim. They all had business plans. They all had grant writing folks. And they said, and Reese came along and he went fire, ready aim. I saw what needed to be done and I just simply stepped up and did it. And I then got invited the next month to the national strategy that was being developed by the U.S. Surgeon General for suicide prevention in the U.S. And I ended up being one of the co-authors in producing that national strategy. That event helped kick off our program, 1-800-Suicide. As you can see here, the same Surgeon General, David Satcher, dedicating 1-800-Suicide. You can't really see behind his shoulder, but that's a picture of Kristen on that poster. And look at the date. You know, it's 1 year and 1 month from the day she died. It also happened to be the anniversary of when her dad dies 5 years later. Ironically, when the millionth call, literally the millionth call to 1-800-Suicide occurred on May 7th in 2004. Just one of many, many amazing coincidences that have occurred in the last 22 years. After the dedication, I ended up getting a call from Tipper Gore's office, who at the time, her husband was Vice President, Al Gore. Al should have been our president. Anyhow, she was running the National Mental Health Awareness Campaign, and she wanted to have a phone number to stick on the ads. Very reasonable request. And I informed her team that there's no way we could do it. And they said, why not? And I said, well, we only have 8 crisis centers right now in the country that are answering the calls, and they're already swamped. And if you were to publish it on MTV, Nickelodeon, VH1, which is where they plan to advertise, I said, you'll crash the system the first day you launch your program. So they said, what do you need? And I said, about $150 million. And they laughed and said, well, we can pay your phone bill and we can show you how to get the $150 million. And I said, okay, I'm game. And so they said, find a friendly senator and draft a piece of legislation and get that senator to approve it. And so as you can see, the next year, May 10th, I was at a conference that Senator Kennedy and Senator Wellstone and Senator Pete Domenici. You can see them here. Two of them have unfortunately passed. Paul Wellstone died on my birthday in 2001 in a plane crash with his wife and his one of his daughters and his staff. Ted Kennedy, as we all know, died from the horrible brain cancer. Pete Domenici's retired, and he is in New Mexico. So anyhow, I ended up crashing this conference. I'd never been to one before, and I ended up sitting in the front row, and I ended up going over and thanking Pete Domenici for being the lone Republican who would support mental health causes. And they started bringing up mental health consumers, and at that point, whoever was the next speaker wasn't moving fast enough for Pete, so he looked at me, he said, "Are you the next speaker?" And I said, "But of course I am." And I got up to the podium and gave a impromptu, unplanned speech about Kristen, how she died, and how I started 1-800-SUICIDE, and how 90% of crisis centers in America did not have a certification independent outside of their agency. And where the words came from, I may never know, but I said we wouldn't allow our kids to go to a daycare center that didn't have some level of state certification. Why are we letting suicide hotlines operate without independent audits and certifications and standards? With that, I got a standing ovation. I went and sat back down, and Senator Kennedy comes over and sits next to me. And the thing I learned that day was when you share your story, your pain, your suffering, what you've been through, your walk, it gives permission to the person you're sharing with to share theirs with you. And so he starts telling me how 2 weeks earlier, a good friend of his had shot and killed himself in Hyannis, and he was still grieving that loss. And I had in my pocket that draft legislation that Tippers people told me to write, and I pulled it out and I handed it to Ted Kennedy, and literally 6 weeks later, you'll see the date here, June 28th, 2000, and that the Senate passed a bill to fund 1-800-SUICIDE. So literally from 6 weeks of meeting Ted Kennedy, and there's the amendment, $3 million added to SAMHSA. And right now, all suicide prevention funding in the United States came out of that program and grew out of that program. So it was one of those miracle moments that you couldn't plan. I certainly had no expectations. I just went there to wear a T-shirt and go rah, 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 and let politicians know that mental health advocates like myself care about the legislation that gets passed. So what I'm going to share with you now is, how do we prevent suicide? Can we prevent suicide? And then how do we do it? And the answer to can we, the answer was given by the U.S. Surgeon General in 1998 in that October conference I was at. And he said, the number one most preventable form of death in America is suicide. So we've had many studies, which I'll cover at the end of this, that have proven amazing success. And what you're going to learn in the next half hour are the basic tools that will help you get those skills. We want to raise your awareness, teach you the warning signs, some of them, dispel the myths, and we do that through statistics, and teach you 3 simple things, which is how to question somebody that you're worried about, how to persuade somebody to get help, and then refer them to where that help is. And you'll notice that hope is actually all by itself. And the reason for that is hope, instilling hope in somebody is the most important thing you can do in suicide prevention. It's pretty much impossible for somebody to kill themselves if they have hope. It's when hopelessness sets in that somebody is able to kill themselves. We start with the facts, and that is about 50,000 people each year die by suicide in the U.S. The truth is, it's way more than that. A lot of deaths, like single car, single occupant fatalities, are not listed as suicides, are listed as accidents, even though an automotive engineering study back in 1994 proved that over 70% of single car, single occupant fatalities were indeed suicides. They did psychological autopsies on the people that had died. What's more stunning is over 1 million people every year in the United States attempt suicide severely enough that require hospitalization. And each of those hospitalizations costs $10, $20, $30, $40,000 on average. So it's a huge financial burden to our society, and the impetus for preventing the attempt as well as the completion. About every 13 minutes, somebody dies by suicide in the U.S. And clinical studies show that 6 survivors, 6 people like myself, I'm a survivor, having lost a loved one to suicide. The reality is it's way higher, but we don't have the statistical data to prove it. It's considered to be the second leading cause of death for college-age students. It's the third leading cause of death for all young people, 14 to 24, in the prime of their lives. It's the 10th ranking cause of death from all ages. And when you just take 18 to 65 for adults, it is literally the 4th leading cause of death. It's the highest in white men over the age of 45. Most people don't realize that is a fact, or why. And it's mainly because boys are raised to not cry, show their emotions, stuff their feelings down, and as men, unable to have that emotional intelligence, have that ability to connect with support systems, reach out for help. Now, the interesting correlation to that is the lowest rate of suicide in the United States happens to be African American women across the lifespan. And you'll never hear that anywhere either. And their rate is about 1 per 100,000, where the white males over 45 is 20 per 100,000, 20 times the rate. And there's only been 2 studies, one in 2003 by Dr. Carl Bell and Dr. Donna Holland Barnes out of Chicago, and then one that just came out 2 months ago that addressed why African American women are so resilient. And all they've come up with so far is that they tend to have a strong sisterhood to get their problems, issues off their chest. They're not carrying them around. They tend to have a strong faith connection, and they also tend to be the head of the household, which means they're needed and they're depended on by their family. So there's a lot we could do to help people develop those same resilient skills. Firearms account for over 50% of all suicides. For men, it's over 70% of all suicides that are done with a firearm. And I'm not saying I'm against firearms or we should be against firearms, but if somebody's depressed, they should be in a safe with or have a trigger lock so that somebody who is depressed won't be able to impulsively end their depression, their pain that they're living through using a gun. Interestingly enough, during the height of the AIDS epidemic from 1979 to 2003, we lost about 500,000 people to AIDS. And in the subsequent years, we spent billions and billions of dollars to develop remedies, treatments, advertising, public health programs, you name it. And by rights, we should have done it sooner than we did. But in that same time period, we lost almost 1 million people to suicide. We all knew about AIDS, but nobody was talking about suicide. And yet, in that same time period, we didn't spend 1 penny of federal money to help prevent suicide. Just shows the dichotomy. 20% of all of us will know somebody in our immediate family dying by suicide, and 60% of us will personally know somebody who dies by suicide. The idea is that learning this question, persuade, refer, QPR as we refer to it, or any basic gatekeeper training program, that you won't have that happen if it hasn't happened in your family. If you've lost somebody in your family, you have my deepest sympathies, and I hope you're getting the support that you need. If you don't, go to afsp.org, and they have a whole list of all the support groups in America that you can access. In all the psychological autopsy studies done over the last 50 years, they found that upwards of 90% of people who die by suicide suffer from depression or other co-occurring mental health disorders such as bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, alcohol, substance abuse, schizophrenia, and obviously the major depression. All right, little guessing game. It's about a bridge. It's 84 years old, considered to be an architectural marvel. There have been over 2,000 suicides off this bridge, and every week 2 to 3 people are stopped. What bridge is this? Nobody wants to guess? All right, so if you guessed the Golden Gate, you were right. Now the reason why I have this slide in here is because the very first study that was done that proved that you can prevent suicide was they followed 515 people that were restrained from 1937 to 1970 from jumping off the bridge. And they followed them through their natural life, and they found that 5% of them did go on to complete suicide, but that 95% did not. And we're talking the dark ages of mental health. 33 people actually did not die. Kevin Hines being the most well-known of those. And each of those were followed up with for 2 years, and they found that they all basically said things like, I want to live, I wished I hadn't done this, and of course no one swam to shore and jumped again. The key is, and the reason why we can prevent suicide is when somebody is at the stage where they want to end their life, they clearly don't want to live anymore. But at the same token, they also don't want to die. It's ambivalence. They're stuck in that place where they don't know what to do to be able to continue their life and to be able to live without suffering and pain. So the act of ending their life is to end that pain in most cases. And all of the folks that suffered what we call significant suicide attempts, like trying to shoot yourself, jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge would certainly fall into that category. They all basically say when they come off the ventilators, when they come to, they wish they hadn't done it. And so our job, all of us, humanity, is to be that person, to restrain that person from jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, hugging that person, letting them know that you care about them, and sticking with them until they get the help that they need. One of the cool things that has happened as a result of our work is we now have a barrier being built on the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, mind you, I am not a big fan of barriers because we have a lot of bridges, and it would cost more money than it would to provide proper mental health services for folks. But the reality is that is the icon in America. Every country's got one for suicide, and this one is being taken away. And it sends a message to all 300 million Americans that as a society, we do care. We care that you live. We care that you not die by suicide. So QPR is not intended to provide a form of counseling or treatment. You're not becoming a professional by learning the basic suicide prevention skills. I liken it to CPR, and I normally at this point would say, all those who know CPR, raise your hands, and usually half the folks in the room would raise their hands. And I'd ask then, how many of you used it? And usually maybe one or two hands would go up, and I was like, what? You must be the lifeguard or a nurse or EMT. And sure enough, they are one of those. I said, the difference is with QPR, it's just as easy to learn, if not easier. And most importantly, you'll be able to actually use it today, every day of your life, because we all encounter people that their affect is off. They seem bummed out, depressed. And by asking them, you're not putting the idea in their head. You're actually opening the door up for them to communicate what's going on with them. So QPR is designed mainly to offer hope and empower each of the people that take this course to have confidence that by engaging somebody that they're worried about, nothing bad's going to happen. So what we do is we go through first all the myths. And the first myth is that no one can stop a suicide. It's inevitable. The fact is, if people get the help that they need, they may never be suicidal again. Remember that Golden Gate study? 95% went on to live a natural life. It isn't to say that everybody who may be suicidal, that there is treatment for them that will work. You can't make that blanket statement. One day, hopefully, we will get there, but the numbers of treatments that are effective with less side effects are the best they've ever been. So if you know somebody who's depressed and suicidal, there's never been a better time in history to be able to help that person. The biggest myth after that one is confronting somebody or asking them if they're suicidal will in fact cause them to potentially end their lives. The reality is it's the exact opposite. By asking, you're helping to relieve the pressure. I liken it to a teapot that's full of water with a cap on, sitting on a nice hot fire. What's going to happen is if you don't lift that top off, it's going to explode. And same with humans. And so you've got to be able to let that top off. And by asking somebody in an empathetic way that you're worried about, gives that person permission to talk about it. And just that act of talking about it and sharing it in confidence with somebody that cares about them, that in itself can be part of the treatment program, the beginning of a treatment program. Having support, knowing that somebody else is there, is absolutely essential. I love this one. Only experts can prevent suicide. Well, keep in mind, my wife was in a psychiatric care facility under the care of psychiatrists and psychotherapists and mental health professionals. And sadly, we lose upwards of 1,600 people every year in psychiatric care facilities on what we call a suicide watch. Suicide watch is where they check in every 15 minutes, and it doesn't take that long to die. Another myth is that suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. The truth is that almost all will either say something or do something, or they're in a situation that compels those around them to be concerned. So looking at what somebody's saying and asking the next question, if it doesn't mean that because somebody says something or they do something that they're necessarily suicidal, but it begs the question. We'll get into that a little more later. They say that people that talk about suicide, wanting to end their lives by suicide, won't actually do it. And when you look at the over 1 million people that attempt suicide every year, yeah, I'm sure that a lot of them were people struggling and trying to get help in the most inappropriate way possible. And some of them end up dying in the process of trying to get that help by trying to end their lives by taking an overdose of pills. Another myth is once somebody has decided to end their lives by suicide, there's nothing anybody can do to stop them. And again, I refer back to that Golden Gate study, but the reality is almost anything that you do will be a plus as long as it comes from empathy. And like the Surgeon General said in 1998, it is the most preventable form of death in America. So what we're going to teach you are the basic clues and warning signs, and they come in three different forms. One is what they say, one is what they do, and one is the situation that they're in. And sometimes all three converge, and then you have a potentially serious potential for suicide on your hands. So we always say err on the side of caution, take all signs seriously. The verbal clues, the direct ones, are straight up ones. I decided to kill myself. I'm gonna end my life. I'm gonna end it all. I wish I were dead. What I would, the only one that I actually don't get too upset when I hear, and I feel like, okay, we got some time, is if such and such doesn't happen by such and such a date and time, then I'm going to kill myself. Well, that gives you that window, whatever that window is, to address it and help them. People will say things that are not quite so direct, like, I'm tired of my life, I just can't go on. Now, we probably all have said that at one stressful moment or another in our lives. It doesn't mean you're suicidal, but it does beg the question, why are you feeling this way now? What's going on? My family would be better off without me. That's a very common one. And when you look at the white males over 45, that seems to be one of the leading reasons, is that they feel they're a burden to others. What they don't realize is that they're creating a whole new burden. They're taking their pain and suffering and they're passing it on to their loved ones. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? I just want out. I won't be around much longer. Pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. Those are indirect clues, but certainly ones that beg the question, why? The behavioral clues are things like, believe it or not, a previous suicide attempt. Now, while I said earlier that if people get the help they need, they may never be suicidal again, and that's the key. And typically, when somebody attempts suicide and they're patched up and discharged from the hospital, they're not given mental health professional support. They're sent home. They may be given a referral, but they shouldn't be leaving the hospital. They should be going directly into a intensive therapy care environment that works for them in a positive way, not in a harsh way. Lockdown facilities, I don't think are as necessary as being in a bucolic setting where it is peaceful and the people that are working with you care about you. Things like acquiring a gun or stockpiling of pills. Somebody wants to get a gun to protect themselves or they want to go hunting, fine. But if they've never had one before, begs the question, why now? I remember the month before Kristen died, she asked me to take out a gun permit. I was like, we've never owned a gun. You don't like guns. I don't like guns. Why would you want me to take out a gun permit? I even asked the psychiatrist. I said, isn't that a red flag? And he said it wasn't. He was wrong. Now, when you have depression, moodiness, and hopelessness together, co-occurring all three, that is what we call a lethal combination. Putting personal affairs in order, nothing wrong with that. But if it's out of character, it begs the question, why? Why now? Why are you doing it? Is somebody getting married? Maybe they were diagnosed with a terminal illness. You don't know. Giving away prized possessions, especially for young people, that's a very common thing to do before they die. Kristen was making these beautiful water fountains and giving away to our friends literally a couple months before her death. And that was, it was like every one of these warning signs and behavioral clues she had. Sudden interest or disinterest in religion. What you're looking for are character behavioral changes, significant ones. There's nothing wrong with having an interest in religion. As pointed out, the African-American women, one of their resilient protective factors was the fact that they had a strong faith connection. But if they never had one, and now all of a sudden they're going to church 7 days a week, it begs the question, why? Maybe they have a loved one who is dying and they're going to pray and they're doing whatever they can to help that person. let's say they were very solid in their faith, and all of a sudden they're falling away, not going to church, they're falling outside that community. It's, again, the complete opposite, but both are warning signs of a behavioral clue. Drug or alcohol abuse, especially after recovery, can when you think about it, when do we do the dumbest things? Like when I fell off sailboats. Usually there's alcohol or some substance involved that impairs your judgment, but also reduces your inhibition. And you look at the people that die by suicide in America, over 80% of them had some kind of substance in their bodies that might impair their judgment or reduce their inhibitions. Anytime you have unexplained anger, moodiness, aggression, irritability, that in itself is a behavioral clue. Men don't show depression the way women do. Where women show depression, basically crawling inside themselves, crying, you can see it. You can see the depression. With men, they get angry. It's like weird, but that's what they do. And so instead of getting the help they need, that anger, which is outward, can get turned inward and become a suicide attempt or suicide completion, especially if by gun. So the situational clues that we're looking for are like a major loss, being fired, being expelled from school. These things don't mean that somebody is suicidal, but those are the situations that people that die by suicide are usually finding themselves in. Recent unwanted move, a big thing happening in their life. It might even be a positive thing. With Kristen, we literally bought our first house the month before she died. We closed on it 2 weeks before she went in the hospital and died. And I know that the mortgage, buying a house, that was a pretty serious, heavy thing. And the neighborhood we were moving into wasn't as nice as the one we were leaving. And I think that also had played a small part. Loss of any major relationship, breakups, especially young people. They don't have the perspective of time that us older folks do. And so they think that their whole life is going to be crap because they lost their girlfriend, boyfriend, person they loved. Anytime there's a death of a primary person, such as a spouse, anybody who loses a primary person to suicide, such as myself, are 9 times more likely themselves to die by suicide. You lose a child, I cannot imagine. I know what I went through losing Kristen. My heart goes out to every parent who loses a child by suicide. We're not supposed to outlive our children. And then diagnosis of a serious or terminal illness, which I mentioned earlier. And I'm sure if anybody watching this knows somebody that was diagnosed with a serious or terminal illness, that they were fighting for every minute they could get, trying every treatment that they had access to. But it's in that first 72 hours, first 36 to 72 hours, where their moorings have been cut and they no longer have control over their destiny. Not that they ever did, but they thought they did. And it's one of the reasons why the National Cancer Institutes give out our phone number when somebody gets diagnosed with a terminal illness. It's just in those first couple of days. Same thing if they're imprisoned, jailed. It's that first 36, 72 hours where most prisoners, inmates end up dying by suicide. The other times are when family are expected to come and they don't come, when they get arraigned, when they are sentenced. These are all key red flag points for people in the prison system. Anticipated loss of financial security, and just like the loss of freedom, that is the same cutting of the moorings as a terminal illness. You don't have control over it anymore. Somebody else is controlling the rest of your life. Loss of a cherished therapist. I remember it took Kristen years to find a therapist that she trusted and was able to work with. And literally 2 months before her death, he left the private practice and joined the VA system. And the VA got a really great therapist, and unfortunately, Kristen lost her cherished therapist. And if you think about, sharing your deepest, darkest, innermost pain, secrets with a total stranger, very difficult to do. Finding that doctor, finding that therapist, that person that you can trust, and then to lose that person, that can be a mountain that some folks just can't climb again. And then the last one that we mentioned is the fear of becoming a burden to others, like I mentioned about the white males over 45. All right, so you've seen the behavioral clues, you've observed the situation that the person is in, you've heard what they say, you're worried, you're concerned. So the tips for asking somebody, the first thing we say is, if you're in doubt, don't hesitate, ask the person. But I put a caveat on that. If you're not comfortable asking them, it's going to be apparent in your voice and your affect. Get somebody who is comfortable, because you may only have one shot of getting that person to open up, and who knows what their plan is and how soon it is. So you always want to make sure that when you ask somebody, there aren't a lot of other people around, that you're in a private setting. If you wear a watch, as you can see I don't, take it off, mainly because you don't want to be looking at it, and make sure you're giving yourself plenty of time, because you may be the first person asking them, and it's like a waterfall. So you want to let them talk freely, not make judgments. You don't want to make the judgments. Be accepting, listen to them, and if they're reluctant, be persistent. I'll tell you a quick story. A couple of years after Kristen's death, I was flying on a plane coming to DC from San Francisco, and it was going through Minneapolis, and I was sitting next to this beautiful young woman who I'm sure got hit on by every guy that she came in contact with, and so she, on the plane, had a book, and she had it up to her face like this, reading the book. And I had recently read a book called The Celestine Prophecy, which I thought was a true book. I found out it was fiction, and but at the time I still thought it was true, and so I was trying out what it said in there. It said that everybody that you meet on a plane, a train, a bus, doesn't matter where, that person is something that you need to complete your journey, and you in turn have something that they need to complete their journey. And so you're never going to find out what that is if you don't open up and share what your journey is. So I was telling everybody what happened to Kristen and the work I was doing, and this poor gal, she's like, I've never known anybody who's suicidal. I've never known anybody who died by suicide, and just back to the book. And I could sense something was off, and so I just kept pursuing and kept pursuing. 30 minutes out of Minneapolis, she breaks down and starts crying, not because of my pestering her, but the whole reason why she's on the plane is because her best friend, who lives in Minneapolis, was in the Mayo Clinic after a suicide attempt the night before. So she was flying to be at her best friend's bedside, and she had no idea what to say, and she had no idea what to do, and she was at a loss to how to help her friend. And the funny thing was, in our communications back and forth, she had said that she worked for Target Outdoor Advertising, and I knew the company because my partner in suicide prevention, which happened to be based in Minneapolis, hired one of the folks from Target Outdoor Advertising. So I said, wow, you worked at Target Outdoor Advertising? Did you know Patty Johnson? And she said, that was my boss. I said, you're not going to believe this, but she now works for us. I'm going to give you her phone number where she's at now. When you get off the plane, give Patty a call. Patty knows every quality suicide prevention expert in Minneapolis, and she will help you and help your friend. I mean, what are the chances of that? So, like I say, if you're concerned and they're reluctant, be persistent. And always make sure you have resources on hand, where the person can go. You don't want to go in empty-handed. Find out what resources are in the community where that person is. And as we always like to say, it's less important how you ask the question than you asking the question. I'll cover in a little bit how not to ask the question, but first we'll cover the ways to ask it. Most people like the less direct approach. Like, have you been unhappy lately? Have you been very unhappy lately? Or have you been so unhappy lately that you're thinking about ending your life? And then the most softball approach of that is, you ever wish you could go to sleep and never wake up? So in my opinion, the softball approach is too easy to dodge. I like the direct approach, asking them straight up. But in context, I noticed that you have been, or I noticed that you did, or I learned that this happened to you. Are you thinking of harming yourself or ending your life? They are going to be caught off guard because they may have a pat answer for how are you doing? I'm fine, right? In Europe, if you ask people if they're fine, you better have a half hour because they're going to tell you exactly what's going on in their life. Where in America, you ask somebody how you doing and say, I'm fine, even if they're completely hanging on by a thread, ready to fall apart. So I like the direct, you look pretty miserable. I'm wondering if you're thinking about suicide. And if you don't feel comfortable asking that question, as I said earlier, get somebody who can, because you only get that one shot potentially to help that person before an attempt or completion. The only way not to ask the question is, you're not suicidal, are you? Because that lets them off the hook. No, of course not. Or, you're not crazy enough to do something like that. That becomes judgmental. And again, they're going to resist, push back, and you're not going to get the honest answer you're looking for. All right, so believe it or not, getting somebody to admit that they're suicidal is not difficult, especially asking from a point of empathy, caring, and in context. The way the VA is doing it and the Department of Defense is doing it, where they're asking every single time they come in contact with their leadership or medical services, it's a box to check. They ask everybody. And that is the most inappropriate thing to do, because it starts, when they get hit with it all the time, it does start to get them thinking, wow, maybe I should be suicidal. What's going on here? I've heard a lot of veterans tell me that they feel like they're just another number when they get asked that question, because it's not in context, it's not because of something that's going on in their lives, and it's not because that person really cares. It's checking a box. So we don't want to do that. All right, how to persuade somebody to get help. Believe it or not, it's a lot easier than you think. You first want to listen to the problem, give them your full attention, and whatever you're comfortable saying, as long as it's true to your heart. A lot of people like the phrase, remember, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Something like that. Whatever it is that you can, be on the side of living, that's what you want to impart. But it's got to be true, your words, not mine. You don't ever want to rush to judgment. You don't want to add more guilt on them, and you want to offer hope in any form. And for the average person who is suffering a situational depression, we're not talking a lifelong battle with a major mental health issue. The hope can be just simply, let's find a treatment that works for you. I mean, there's tons of them out there. I probably haven't tried them all yet, and the answer may very well be no, I haven't. Now, if we're talking somebody who has a serious mental health illness and they have indeed tried everything, or so they think, with those folks, I say things like, have you ever tried a vagus nerve implant? Of course, nobody even knows what one is, much less having one. There's a great book out of the Black Hole by Charlie Donovan, and he was the first recipient of the vagus nerve implant. And it cost the company almost $1 billion to bring that product to market. And basically it's a little copper wire that gets inserted into the back of the skull, into the vagus nerve, and then you got a little transistor that sends an impulse to the vagus nerve, which triggers happy thoughts. So the folks who have received the vagus nerve implant credit it with saving their lives. But there are many others. Deep magnetic brain stimulation. Everybody has heard the phrase an MRI, right? Oh, I went to get an MRI. And so they were doing a clinical series of tests years ago on bipolar patients. And they found that when they went into the MRI machine, they were depressed, whatever their affect was. They came out, they were happy. They're like, wait a second, we didn't give them any drugs. How could they be happier? And what they found was that the magnetic resonance, the imaging itself was causing stimulation of the brain. And by targeting the very parts of the brain that are inactive, the MRIs or fMRIs are able to really combat depression and help with other mood disorders. But there are many, many other treatments, and this is the holy grail. This is the not billion-dollar product. This is the trillion-dollar product for the company that comes up with a treatment that helps everybody. So you want to offer that hope. It's like, if they came out tomorrow with the treatment that would not only end your pain and suffering, but would make you feel better than you've ever felt in your life, and you killed yourself today, how, that one day, how'd you survive to this point? You want to help them get to the next day. What did you use to get to this point? So you want to get them to accept help that has worked for them in the past. And so by asking them what that was, what worked for you, then where is that same help today? And then say, can I bring you to that place? Can I bring you to that person? Can I go with you? You're not alone anymore in this. Will you promise not to kill yourself until we found some help? Depending on the seriousness of the situation, you pretty much, if somebody were having a heart attack, you wouldn't say, hey, I'll see if I can find a CPR expert, and I'll see if I can find a heart surgeon for you. Don't die on me, right? I mean, that's really what the equivalent is. Just because you can't see it, it's there. And we actually can see it now with the MRIs. So if somebody is truly suicidal and at the end of your interaction with them, they are still suicidal, don't leave them. You don't want that on you, and you don't want them attempting and dying. So basically, the fact that you're willing to listen, you're willing to get them help, to go with them to get help, that can rekindle hope and make all the difference in the world. The referral part is the most difficult because every person is different. Their circumstances, what works for them is going to be different. And if they've tried stuff in the past, maybe it was the wrong amounts. Most people don't even realize what a pharmacologist is. We know what a pharmacist is, and we know what a psychotherapist and a psychologist and a psychiatrist is. But a pharmacologist, well, that's a person who is a psychiatrist, is an MD, but they also have the added piece of all the chemical interactions with the brain, so they know what every drug does, what the side effects, the outcomes, and what combinations work. And if anybody watching this has ever interacted with a pharmacologist, you're in the tiny minority of less than 1% of our population. Yet we see the schools now, the medical schools, churning out pharmacologists. It is a very fast-growing sector. And every major city has a hospital, educational facility that pharmacologists reside at. So what I would recommend is, if the person has had a drug therapy in the past that didn't work for them, maybe worked for a while and then stopped working, ask them if they've seen a pharmacologist, and if they haven't, help them find one in their local area. Having that person on the team with a psychiatrist can be invaluable, because they have greater insight into the drug interactions and what combinations may work better. You also want to make sure that you're not alone in helping folks. You start by saying, you're not alone anymore. I will help you get through this, but you can't be with somebody 24/7, right? As much as you may want to be. I certainly tried with Kristen. In fact, the only night I got sleep was the first night she was in the psychiatric care facility, because I felt she was safe. You want to get other people involved. Maybe somebody in the church that your friend goes to. Maybe it's a coach. Maybe it's a teacher. Hopefully some family members that they trust that can get involved. Other friends that they trust other than you. The more folks on the team, the better. And making sure that everybody's on the same page. You're not talking behind the loved one's back. Everybody is transparent in that process, so that if the person becomes more acute, it doesn't matter which one of the circle is with that person. They're able to spot it, and they're able to ring everybody else and basically bring in the cavalry. In some states, almost all states, you need an actual signed consent form to be able to speak with the mental health professional. And as long as the patient has signed that and has named you and the other members of the team as folks okay to talk to and share that personal medical information with, then now you're talking about a real safety net that can help protect that person. You also want to follow up with them, with a card, phone call. Make sure that they're complying with treatment if they're in a treatment process. Letting them know that you still care beyond the crisis is essential. As we always like to say, when you apply the seeds of QPR, you're applying the seeds of hope. Now, as I like to say, we put a man on the moon 51 years ago. Of course, the guy who set us in motion, today is the anniversary of his death, John F. Kennedy. Tough day. We put a man on the moon. So when anybody says to me, we can't do this, we can't do that, I say, of course we can. We put a man on the moon. We can do this. We virtually eliminated suicide in an entire healthcare system in the city of Detroit. It's called the Henry Ford Health Foundation. And their suicide rate was 80 per 100,000, 4 times the highest average of white males over 45 in America. So they partnered up with the University of Michigan and developed the depression program. And what they did was they basically taught what you just learned to their entire staff. Anybody who touched a patient learned this information, and those that were in a position were given authority to, when they saw a red flag, to walk the person down to the mental health clinic and get that person a complete mental health examination and they took their suicide rate from 80 per 100,000 to 0 for 14 straight quarters. It's 3.5 years. It's been written up in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, so Google it. It's not an exciting read, other than the results is exciting. We can do this in any healthcare system in the country. We can do it in any community in the country. So since we can, why not do it where you guys are, especially your kids. And obviously 1-800-SUICIDE, the phone number, your local suicide hotline, generally 211 rings into it, not always. And we also have an online resource. I love the way Mallory spelled it, but it's one word, imalive.org. And there's our logo, so you know you're on the right page. And there's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week crisis chat service there. And everybody that is on that line has been certified competent in our heart training, hearing empathically as responders training. And they have all had more training than a psychiatrist in preventing suicide, which is sad to say that psychiatrists don't receive more. In fact, psychiatrists are the only ones who receive any suicide prevention training, and they get about 10 hours. Our people all go through a minimum of 20 hours of training, and most are in the 30, 40-hour range. And anybody on this feed, anybody seeing this, wants to become a volunteer and get trained, go to imalive.org and click on Become a Volunteer. And there's a frequently asked questions that will answer probably 99% of the questions that you might come up with. And if they're not all there, then email me, Reese@hopeline.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And that is a wrap. Cut.